What is up, Hot Take Nation? It is DRW here, coming to you from World Broadcasting headquarters in the basement, shag carpet and all. And if you listened to our first episode, you know that I told the story of the first time I was so proud of this basement because we were getting ready to drill. It was 2017 and I was having like 8 Starbucks coffees a day, which was taking about 20 minutes of my time to drive to and from Starbucks in Cherry Creek. B, the salespeople were having to leave downtown and go to Cherry Creek. It was super inefficient. So I said, I'm going to convert the basement room because honestly, who really wants your parents being able to stay with you for more than 3 or 4 weeks? So I took the bed out of here, built an office, and the first person to come and visit was Lindsey Buck. And I had not met her before, and it hadn't dawned on me that I'm a dude. I mean, I know that part, but B, that perhaps inviting a female salesperson to your house and then providing the instructions to come down the back stairs into the basement. And then when she enters the basement, through a level of bravery I can't imagine, sees a single couch in the middle of the room and a shag carpet. And a dude she's never met before who then proceeds to say, because it was wet outside, please take your shoes off. I mean, it's just, it's truly the most ridiculous story. And so as payback or retribution, I wanted to have Lindsey back on the podcast today to talk about her version of the story. You'll be happy. She also brought her colleague, Eric Marshall. So Lindsey Buck and Eric Marshall, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And they did bring a hatchet. So Eric is here, as he says, for security purposes, and a hatchet was brought as a gift. So with that, Lindsey, walk me through your mental state as you were pulling up to the house at the time.
So to start, one of our mutual friends introduced us, and she said that I should go meet with him, and she's known him for a long time, good dude. So he says, let's meet at my house. I'm like, home office, okay. And the thing is, he sounded so proud of his brand new office. He just really, really wanted me to come over, and for what reasons, I don't know. And I was questioning that in my mind. And on my way over, I called my boss. I'm like, man, pull up to this guy's house. This is kind of weird. Don't know what's going on. And I think when I text you and you said come around the back stairs, that's when I was like, oh man, if my boss didn't know where I was and we didn't have that mutual friend, it would have been a hard nope.
It was peace out. Now, Eric, this is the first time you're seeing the basement. How are you? How are you feeling about the shag carpet there?
I love it. It's really nice on my feet. I'm sitting here rubbing my feet back and forth. It's so soft. I also know exactly where all the exits are. Yeah. So let's just be clear.
That's key. And so Lindsey, you come in and we're going to talk about perforation charges, and there's literally just a couch, and so I invite you to the couch and we sit opposite each other, and I could tell that you were uncomfortable. And this was the first time to me in my mind I was like, maybe like this isn't a normal maybe this isn't like a good idea. Maybe there's a reason people meet at Starbucks. And so I don't know if you remember this part of the story, but so One Energy was a remote office, and so none of the partners worked in the same city, and we used video conference. And so to help calm Lindsey down, I said, don't worry, see the camera on top of my computer.
I'm 100%. This is how Blair Witch Project ended.
Yeah, there's people watching you, so you're safe. And somehow in my mind that was supposed to bring the level of anxiety down. So that was the story. Do you see all of them
watching you?
Yeah, exactly. This is
holes getting deeper.
So I thought we'd start with that just because I did want to have Lindsey back, and I'm glad Eric came. So Lindsey, you've been in the industry now for how long?
6 years.
6 years. Mm-hmm. And so taking that experience aside, what have you had sort of being a woman, we'll just throw it out there, being a woman in an industry, in a sales role where you're selling to people. Have you had awkward situations? And for people who are out there, maybe entering a sales career or dealing with it, what would you recommend doing, or what tricks and tips have you found that have been successful in your career to avoid the creepy basement?
I was going to say, don't go in the creepy basement. It's funny because I started out in technology sales when I first got out of college. And that was really where I knew I wanted to do sales, period. What I wanted to sell, I had no idea whatsoever. So I went to all the recruiters and I said, hey, I'm going to be a pharmaceutical sales rep. And they're like, oh, that's cute, little girl. Go back in your hole. Go get some experience. So I decided to go to a company that has since been bought out, and it was called CBeyond, and it was a technology company, and they were just known for the cutthroat sales. So if you did not sell 1 month, you got put on what they called a plan. And then if you did not sell the other month, you were fired, period. And so it was extremely high turnover and little pay. And it got to the point where they said, if you can make it a year, you can do whatever you want. So I made it a year, and it's funny because I'll still run into some of my old coworkers downtown, and it's like a club because it was like dog years. It felt like
Navy
forever.
SEALs kind of training.
Oh yeah. And so I had to go to 50 doors a day and knock on business doors. So I was selling telecom, which was at the time a T1, which was 1.5 megs. So even at the time, it was an outdated technology.
Right.
So outdated technology for at least 2 times what our competition was selling. And so I was walking in the snow to businesses, and we had to bring back business cards at the end of the day to show that we were actually working. And then at that point, they actually went through big layoffs, and they went from about 50 people in the branch down to 13. And kind of like it is now, I was the only woman.
Right.
And so I decided that I wanted to get out of that company. I made it my year, which is what my goal was. And I went and sold outsourced IT support for a little company called Greystone out here in Denver. And they're wonderful, and I really appreciated them a lot. And when I was there, I was the only business development person. And at the time, I had a bunch of friends over at School of Mines. So I was hanging out with them, and they were always talking about their homework and fracking, and it was just so intriguing to me and so interesting.
So the sales is really interesting because I've never had a sales job, and I hear stories. Eric, you're more technical sales, right? Is that a fair description of your background?
Yeah, that seems like a fair.
/security.
Yeah, exactly. Red Fox, this is team leader. We're clear to go. So Eric, tell me about sort of sales experiences that you've had in organizations and how that was, and did you have quotas? Was it similar to that?
So yeah, I've actually been pretty fortunate that my career has never been tied directly to what I sell. So I support Lindsey in her sales efforts. Every job I've had, I've been in front of a lot of clients, but I've never really had the anxiety, so to speak, of, having to close a deal. So it's actually the best way to do it because I can be a little bit more open. I can focus on what's right, what's wrong. Let's just do it the way it should be done, and then turn it over to the sales crew to actually close a deal. So my job is to establish that trust technically, which I think goes a long ways. If you can get that trust with a client that just knows that they can call you and something's going to get done, and they don't have to worry about how you're going to do it, how much is it going to cost, how, none of the details matter at that point. I trust you, just do it. That's where I've kind of...
So how much time, as an example, would the two of you spend building a relationship so that you can sort of tee up the sale? Is that a fair characterization, that you're business development and teeing it up, and then you're coming in to help really support but provide the technical expertise, I guess, to close the deal? Is that how much time do you two spend together, and what is that? I call it relationship, but what does that relationship look like?
Yeah, so I think as far as GEODynamics goes, which is the company we work for, we are more specialized perforating, and we also have frac plugs and toe valves. But we really want to partner with our clients, and our whole company mindset is to help our clients create better wells. So higher productivity, and hopefully we can help cut costs as well. So there are some times where we go in and Eric will say, you know what? We think that we should cut how many charges you're running per cluster. And that's unselling us. But overall, it's what's best for our client, and that's what's best for everybody. So it's constantly building that relationship. And some clients are really intrigued immediately by what we have and the technology behind it. And they want to jump face first and really get into it. And then there's some where, they're a little bit more hesitant. They aren't necessarily sure how that technology would play into the bottom line and getting production and really their ROI. So
when you pivoted into oil and gas, and Eric, I know you'd reminded me that when I was at Enerplus, I guess 8 years ago, you were helping on frac execution design. I want to talk about frac design a little bit coming back here, but Lindsey, for you, like when you think about when you started your career in oil and gas, is 2015, 16 kind of time frame? I mean, you kind of came into the industry at the bottom.
So I got to see the boom. So we were still at about
the end of the boom.
$110 oil. So anyways, going back to the technology company, the outsourced IT, and my friends that were over at Mines, I was so excited about oil and gas. I started targeting oil and gas companies as a vertical. So I was meeting with all the IT within those companies. There are a couple of people I still talk to that aren't completions engineers that really helped me shift into this career. But I would talk to recruiters and tell them, if anything comes across your desk for a sales opening, please let me know. And at the time, during the boom, a lot of people were getting hired. And so I went through 2 frac schools and finally started to be able to sell frac, and I got a few jobs, and that's where everything tanked. So I really didn't see that much of the good days, I guess.
So how is it? I mean, over the last, we've been in, I call it, and I'm sure you've seen it, it's a crisis of balance sheets as opposed to a crisis of low commodity prices. But certainly on the sales side and in the oilfield service side, where you're providing a service, I mean, as capital restrains, that you guys are right at the tail of the dog, so you're being whipped. What have you seen in the last 5 years, and how the industry's changed? What different methodologies you're seeing on sales or capital cutting, or where's the focus? Eric, why don't we start with you?
One of the things I see when things are just busy is nobody cares, right? I'll use the DJ. It's an assembly line. Just get it done as quick as you can. Nobody's looking at anything. Nobody's looking to cut costs on a smaller scale. When we see these downturns, I think that's where technologies really thrive. That's when people actually pay attention to the efficiencies that they can get and really kind of improve their assembly line and how it's running. So it's stressful times when things are a little bit lower on commodity prices, but I think that's some of the more fun interactions you're going to have with people, is you're going to come up with new ideas, new technologies, new efficiencies that not necessarily didn't matter before, but nobody cared about implementing before because they were just too busy running and gunning, right?
And so Lindsey, would you say that that's with your technology, and maybe talk a little bit about what differentiates GEODynamics, but would you say it's easier to sell now, and that really the higher quality products are going to they have more differentiation capability today than they did before? Is that fair characterization?
Yes. So I think that, of course, price still comes into play, but that's one of the things that I love about Geo. So, fast forwarding a little bit. So I went and sold wireline after the frac company went under immediately in the downturn. And then after that was when they pulled out of the DJ, then I went to go try to find a job in oil and gas. And this was the thick of it. I didn't think I was going to get back into industry. I didn't think I would get any job offers. So I started interviewing with tech companies again, and I ended up getting 3 job offers to stay in industry in sales. And I ended up going with GEODynamics because of their R&D program. So even though everybody's cutting costs and a lot of companies were finding the way to be the cheapest, they were still looking at being the best and the higher quality cell. And even in the heart of the downturn, they were still coming out with new products, which just blew my mind, because when other companies were cutting their staff, Geo still had the ability to go through and do R&D.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting, because obviously we talk a lot about consolidation of the E&Ps, and I hadn't really been thinking through on the service side. Obviously, I would expect to see consolidation as we continue to kind of shrink as an industry, but really that technology differentiation, and so Eric, that kind of brings me to where you and I first started, and I'll let you sort of tee it up, because I know that there were a couple companies, but Anadarko was really big on managed frac design and having quality control. And when I was in Canada, we'd used it. So when I was at Enerplus, we implemented a similar system. Talk to me about frac design and maybe over the last 10 years, high level, what you've seen changed. And then I want to dive in a little bit into how clusters and perforation design and rates and fluids and like what you think there is left to improve, or are we at the end?
I don't think we're at the end. I think we still have a lot to learn, and I think the last 10 years has showed us how much we've learned so far. My first frac design was very deliberate. It was very conventional. It was with the mindset of communicate as much pay as you can with a thick cross-link gel, use the frac model. It's going to be a bi-wing frac. It's everything we think it's going to be, what the model says is right.
So like a big viscous sort of 40-pound gel, low sand loading, low fluid.
Yep.
The Bakken frac, quite honestly, of the 2010 kind of era.
Exactly. Yeah. Where I think things have come the furthest is that conventional thinking of, this 40-pound gel, and you can only go to 4 pound per gallon, and you have to go, at half-pound steps, and you throw a bunch of slugs in. They worked, right? They were better than what we had before. And, here we are today. I don't think anybody's pumped a cross-link fluid that I've seen in, months. Not to say it's not happening, but it's slick water, it's high rate. Entry points are closer together. If you'd have told me 10 years ago we were going to be at 15-foot cluster spacing, I'd have told you you're an idiot, right? But it works. And, why it works, I think, is because we understand our reservoirs a little bit better. 10 years ago, we still had a very conventional way of thinking. And I mean that in more ways than one. We still thought about things as a conventional reservoir. And, they're like, oh, we've got unconventionals now, and everything's modeled after the Barnett Shale. And we realized that, shales aren't all the same. And now we realize that we need a lot of stimulation. We have very low permeabilities. Crosslink gel probably isn't as necessary as we thought it was. Maybe, well spacing is more important. Maybe cluster spacing is more important. And now that we've seen all these decline curves and see how things evolve, we've learned a lot. And I think it's something that you have to be willing to evolve with too. Because again, 10 years ago, slick water was a bad word.
Right. Yeah, now a gel system would be definitely a bad word.
Right.
So when you think about the next 10 years in your career and oil and gas, I mean, how stressed are you? How much do you interpret what's going on in the E&P world with companies? Like you're I'm not going to say it's an outside view, but as you're looking at E&Ps, how do you feel what's next? What's in the next 5 years? What's your perspective, and what do you worry about in terms of your personal, job, income, all that stuff?
I really think that the more data we collect and being able to apply analytics, machine learning, any kind of artificial intelligence, the thing I struggle with right now is we can only measure what we touch, so to speak. So, when we drill, the bit touches the rock, we can figure something out from that. When we do a defit, we know what that closure pressure is. We know what that ISIP is, but we still try to model everything in a far field. So taking what we can measure at a near wellbore aspect and, apply any kind of analytics to it to be more predictive on how things are going to go and how things are going to produce. I think that's got a huge opportunity. At the same time, if you're not the guy that figures it out or knows how to run those machines, that gives you a little anxiety.
Right. Lindsey, what about you?
So
you said, as we were just coming in preamble, so you got married a year and a half ago.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And have a child.
Yep.
Boy, girl.
Little girl.
Name?
Eleanor Ray. She's
Okay.
named after my grandparents.
Love it. And she was born on your first anniversary, so it will be very hard, even though nobody cares about your birthday and nobody cares about your anniversry. At least they're on the same day, so you can knock two
it
birds
out.
out with one stone.
Right.
How do you think about the next 5 years for you and your family?
So when it comes to my family and me, I think that my company is extremely supportive, and that's something that I really, really appreciate. And getting into oil and gas, I haven't met people that care so much about their industry and about their coworkers and about their clients. And that's what makes it so exciting. So my company is very flexible with me. So I am a bit of a busybody. So I started hopping back on my computer and making calls to my clients pretty quickly after I had my baby, but there was no pressure to get back to appointments or really get physically down to meetings in Denver. And so I really appreciated that. And even now I'm working from home 2 days a week, and I'm able to do all my emails and follow-up calls and appointment setting then. But they really, really work with me, and my boss is amazing. I respect him a lot, and he knows that, family's first, and then and he is able to let me have a little bit of leeway. And by all means, it's still working hard, but they also understand that people have lives outside of work as well.
So is it fair to say, I mean, in terms of inclusion, I know a lot of industries are struggling with this. I remember I read an article about probably 10 years ago, it was Harvard Business Review, and it sort of talked about on-ramps and off-ramps for women. And sort of you have this really high-power workforce that for good or for bad. I know I'm absolutely useless at home. My wife would absolutely agree. And she's like, now that you're not full-time working every day in an office, why don't you help more? I have no idea. I'm useless is why. But the story sort of talked about that women as they off-ramp for children and really take the burden of a lot of the family responsibilities. And then how do we on-ramp them back on? It sounds like your company and from your friends in industry that are sort of similar age, do you think that our industry is doing a good job around off-ramping and on-ramping women, or are there things that you would do differently if you were telling an employer now, like really key things to think about from an employee manual standpoint? What would you do to be more inclusive and have better retention and access for women to come back in the workforce?
So I think that with me being in sales, they can see how hard I'm working. I have an actual revenue attached to my hours put in. And so I think that's a big part of it is with women going back to the workforce, you don't physically have to be in the office to be working hard. And especially when babies are young, they sleep all the time. That's their job. And so it's amazing how much I was able to accomplish. And honestly, it forced me to do some of the work that I needed to get done on a computer because I love meeting with people. I love seeing my clients. Getting those quotes out in a timely manner sometimes is a little slacking.
So it helped balance a little bit in terms of being more time efficient, perhaps.
Exactly. And so I think that's part of it is I look at some of the people that are working those 9-to-5s in an office and how much time do you think they spend talking to their coworkers and scrolling Facebook. So I think if you give people the right to manage themselves and they know what's expected of them, they could probably be more efficient if you just left them to their own devices versus if you're forcing them to stay in the same place. So I know for me personally, I had my highest grossing quarter ever with GEODynamics or in general on my maternity leave quarter.
So are you saying that if you empower your employees to just work and make deliverables and work from wherever they want, that they can actually perform at their job? I mean, that is just, wow. No,
mind-blowing, right?
Yeah, mind-blowing. It's almost like it makes
responsibility.
logical sense.
Yeah.
Eric, how about you? I mean, are you in the office? You work from home? Do you have a family? What's your domestic life? Because this isn't an interview, so I'm allowed to ask all of the questions.
All of them. Yeah. I do work from home. I'm downtown usually when Josh or Lindsey are as well. I'm typically with them when I'm downtown. But yeah, I work from home. My wife actually works from home as well. So that's a fun workplace. We've got 3 dogs at the house, and it's just, sometimes chaos, especially when it snows.
Now, do you alternate, do you coordinate schedules to kind of be out of the house at the same time? And the reason I know is my wife is home, I think, and she's, now that I'm home more, she's going back to work, because we were in this room sitting, Lindsey, exactly where you were, and because our house is being renovated and the rest of the rooms were gone, and she's staring at me, like pacing and talking and doing all the things that I do, and she said, I got to get out of here. I can't be stuck in a house with you for the next 20 years. How do you find that with your wife, and how do you coordinate schedules?
We actually have a lot of fun with it. I'd say the hardest part, we have a fairly small house, and it's open, so phone calls can be a little different. I take conference calls, back in the bedroom if she's on a phone call as well. But we have a good time with it. It works out pretty well. And our daughter goes to school, so she can, I can take her to the bus. I can be there when she gets home.
If you had a dream schedule, and maybe you're working it, but work from home, work in the office, at client meetings, like take your 5 days and divide it into like the perfect work schedule. Lindsey, what would yours be?
I'm working it. I love it. It's funny because I look at my husband, and he just got out of the Army less than a year ago. And so he's starting his first career outside of that. And I look at him all the time. I'm like, man, I wish you could have my job. You can't, but I have the best company, the best product, the best boss, the best coworkers, and I wouldn't change a thing. I am so blessed and fortunate.
I love to hear that. At the end of the day, we all, and I missed this early in my career. I really focused on just the company and, why aren't people working? And I put this in quotes, working harder, and why aren't they more FaceTime and et cetera. And at the end of the day, you realize that you're trying to pay your mortgage, you're trying to have a life, you're trying to be challenged in your day to day, and to be given the freedom to kind of control yourself and manage yourself and be held accountable. If you're not delivering, obviously do something different. But as you said, just sitting in an office, to wait till 5 o'clock and scroll on Facebook, waiting till you go. And I think that a lot of people are in that circumstance, and you could probably cut the workday down 60% because people work from home. They have their computers, they have their mobile. They're always thinking about it. Why are we FaceTime? Eric, what's your dream schedule?
Yeah, I almost have to echo Lindsey. I wake up, in the morning when I wake up, usually between 6 and 7 or so, and check your emails, kind of figure out how the day is going to go beside what you already know, and just get it done as it comes in. I think it's really nice to be able to just work when you need to work, and if there's nothing to do, I'm already at home to do nothing. So, the people that have worked with me before, I've been very adamant that if you don't have anything to do, go home and do nothing. Don't try to look useful here. It's not benefiting anybody. Yeah. And it's not to be a derogatory thing, but we're all adults. We have lives. We have things we could do without having to sit here and scroll Facebook until 5 o'clock hits. And I think that's the way things are going. And I hope it stays that way. I think it really empowers people to, be their own schedule makers.
Well, and it's interesting, right? Just from we can debate all of the climate change things in the world, but one of the ways to reduce miles driven, and miles driven are very clearly related to CO2 emissions because people are burning fuel, is to drive less and work from home. I mean, that seems reasonable. What are the downsides? Do you guys see, as you work with E&P companies, are there downsides to people who may be at home, or I guess most E&Ps, just everyone's in the office, 9 to 5 and never leaves? Or do you encounter any negatives of the work from home?
I really don't. I would say even the people that are working from home, we still meet in public places.
So not always straight to basements.
So we'll go grab lunch.
I'm getting this
coffee.
as a key theme. I haven't had a ton of. I did an interview with someone at the house. Also bad idea. But yeah, so public places, good. Yes, I agree with that.
Yeah, but overall, I don't think it's been much of a burden.
Same thing.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I miss from being in an office more on a regular basis is you just can't run down the hallway to talk to someone face to face. And sometimes that is beneficial, not always necessary, but there's a personal aspect to some conversations that you need to be able to read body language. And
do you guys use any video conference technologies internal to your company?
No, because I work from home and I wouldn't put myself on a video.
Yeah.
People don't like his fuzzy robe.
Yeah, and it's funny when I think back to One Energy, and it was a really powerful concept. So we all worked from home. There was no physical office. There was no physical paper, and at the peak we were about 7. But we all, it was a bit of an accountability thing, but it was also because of the whole walk down the hall. So if you were in front of a computer, you just flipped your computer on, and some people would certainly find it weird, but like it was basically like sitting in your office working, and so the 7 of us would be on a screen, and if you wanted to have a private chat, you could like literally poke them and just be like, hey Brandon, and then you could have a face-to-face chat. And that was one way that we were able to sort of move past the how do you not be able to walk by the hall and have a little bit more social, because as you know, like if you're here alone in this basement working, whether it's being distracted or you can sometimes miss the forest for the trees, and you're just very focused on that. So curious if you guys use that or Skype or check-in calls or anything with how you set goals.
I would say that I talked to our VP, Josh Spraker, and Eric probably too much. I actually was thinking the other day I should probably put them on my favorites in my phone,
right?
Because we talk constantly. So while we don't use video conferencing for any reason, we are always texting and keeping each other in the loop on what's going on. And then that's also kind of the beauty of working from home some days, is when I get to go downtown to meet with my clients in person and really have that face-to-face interaction. It's fun, it's exciting. Instead of forcing myself to do it, it's something that I really want to do.
How about CRM tools? Do you and I know that it's a big conversation, having not been in sales, and again, there's a One Energy experience, but we used a CRM. And so because we were all remote, we all entered our conversations and our activities and our technical analysis, whatever we were working on, in a tool. And so we were able to have effectively no meetings, because if you wanted to know about it, it was all on the system. It was an auto email and it was driven. But I do know in the sales world, people can be more protective of clients and customers, and especially historically with a lot of turnover, people didn't really want to use a CRM. So I'm curious, in the sales world and at GEODynamics in particular, do you use it? What do you think of it? What would you do differently or better? Eric, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, my team, we usually just settle for a weekly phone call and keep our own notes, and we have our own group email that everybody sees. But beyond that, we don't really use anything specific other than like a Teams or something that we can all just have an ongoing outward conversation with.
So we don't have anything in place right now, and I am the worst at inputting data. My poor accounts team, my expense reports get in stretching the limit, that's for sure. So if you made me sit down and type out everything, it would not happen. And I'm very old fashioned. I got a notebook when I started with the fracking company and started in industry 6 years ago, and I still use that same notebook.
Yeah.
So then I can refer back to it so easily, and I can see, oh, well, they used to be in 4.5 casing and they bumped up to 5.5. And it's right there for me to look at, versus if I did have a CRM, I'm going to have to be connected to the internet. It's hard to just pull up notes really quickly while I'm right there talking to a client.
Well, and that, Eric, you had said something earlier in the conversation about AI and data and stuff. And one of the things that's interesting to me, and why I say I don't think that AI in particular, or just, if we had more technology, we would be better. One of the reasons I think that that's really tough in our industry is, I think our industry remains really a relationship industry. And there's a lot of FaceTime, there's a lot of problem solving, there's a lot of difference. But then B, we have grown up in an industry, where we probably didn't have as much data, and we didn't enter things, Lindsey, as you say, with the notebook and stuff. And so trying to move people to, well, if you just entered everything, and if you used the single source system, and then all the data was there, and then everyone, the existing workers probably don't migrate to that, which is why these new tools are so hard to implement across companies. Yeah. Whereas maybe a new industry starting from scratch, you might involve people who grow up using that technology. What do you make of that?
You got to change a culture, right, to make it happen, and that's not quite the culture we're in. I actually agree with you. I mean, if you have all this data, why don't we use it? And I guess the thing I see right now is we aren't using it as well as we could. I heard an example the other day. A 737, I think they said, will download, it's like 3 terabytes of data per day. And it's got 5,000 to 7,000 actual measure points of data. An offshore rig has 35,000 data points to measure, and we use like 1% of that data. So the culture's not there to use it yet.
Right.
And that's the first hurdle you've got to get over.
Well, and it also begs the question on the data. We gather a lot of data that isn't important. I mean, we always say, well, if we don't gather it now, we may never use it. But then nobody ever actually uses it. So I wonder sometimes if people they're again missing the forest for the trees, where you have 35,000 points of data, but you only need 7. And those 7 are the things that really drive the business. And once you've perfected the work with those 7, maybe you can start gathering the next 7. And maybe we're overwhelmed with the amount of data that we can actually gather in our industry.
Yeah. Some of it is just, you don't know what to do with too, right? It doesn't matter. And if that's the case, if we don't need it, then stop measuring it, right? You're just spending money to spend money at that point.
So we were talking about sort of oil and gas people in the community. And I don't know if you heard the episode a couple months ago with Nick Williams and his wife, Erin. And they have Down for a Cure, their golf tournament. 3 children, 2 of them have cystic fibrosis. One of those also has Down syndrome, and what they've done in the community and the way the oil and gas comes together to support causes. Eric, you're up for Man of the Year with, tell me about that. The Leukemia Society, is that right?
Yeah. So it's the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. They do a philanthropic competition every year, and it's called the Man and Woman of the Year campaign. It raises, I think last year it raised about $53 million nationwide.
Wow.
Huge impact. And, the reason I got so involved, a couple years ago, my dad called and said that he had just been diagnosed with leukemia and was already in the car on his way over to Denver to start chemotherapy. And
wow.
It's one of those phone calls you don't ever expect, but boy, when it comes in, it hits hard, and it kind of just, you just stop. Like, how is this going to change everything? And, watching him go through his treatments, his chemotherapy regimen was actually the result of an LLS funded study that resulted in 9 new treatments for his type of leukemia. He had AML, and it was a genetically targeted treatment. So essentially they took his blood, they looked at his DNA, they looked at all of his genetic makeup and said, this treatment's going to be the best one for you. Mm-hmm. That was about 6 weeks of inpatient therapy. And after that, they said, that's great. You need a bone marrow transplant. So I actually had the honor of being his donor for that. You
donated to your dad.
Yep. So it kind of weird.
Is that what the pin is?
That's what the pin is. Yep. This is for the society, and kind of start conversations anyway.
Well, I bet that changed your relationship with your father a little bit.
Yeah, he's actually genetically my twin now, which is kind of strange. He's 100% my DNA.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a pretty wild process. But what LLS does through that whole process is, they're funding a tremendous number of studies. So 2018 alone, they put $188 million into cancer research, but also patient support as well. And watching patients that were on the floor with him while he was going through this, some of them hadn't seen their families in weeks because the spouse had to go home to continue to work just to maintain the household or keep insurance. And, these guys are going through some of the most important and stressful times of their lives alone.
Life and death.
Yeah. And so when the society can come in and help them financially so their loved ones can be there to support them through that process.
And so if people want to get involved, or when do they announce if you're the Man of the Year?
So the competition runs from March 5th through May 16th. May 16th is actually a black tie gala. I've got a team built up. Lindsey is actually part of that team. To raise as much money as we can between March 5th and May 16th. Before then, I'm looking for sponsors for the gala. I'm rounding up auction items.
And how can people reach out to you?
Just send me an email, eric.marshall@perf.com.
eric.marshall@perf.com.
Yeah, and then for me, when Eric came to me with this, my grandpa had leukemia and lymphoma and eventually lost the fight. But my father-in-law actually had lymphoma, and he was strong, and he's doing great now. And he is the congressman of the 4th Congressional District in Colorado, as well as GOP chair. And I asked him to speak just about his battle with lymphoma, as well as just the reflection of oil and gas in the state. So we're going to be putting on a big event for Eric as a fundraiser once it is free to start raising funds. And so if anybody's interested in coming, I think it'll be a great event, and we'd love to get everybody from the industry and all their support.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what I love. This industry is so inclusive, and Nick talked about it, and everything I've seen. I mean, just we come together for causes, and we understand that life is more than just work and everything. So congratulations. That's a really great accomplishment. And Lindsey, thanks for that. I would love to have your father-in-law on, and your husband for that matter, military connection, and maybe talk about transitioning out of the military and some of the challenges the GOP is facing. We'll have a family podcast.
The Bucks
are here.
The Bucks. And and then I also wanted to talk about my nonprofit. So,
which is, how cool is that? I mean, everyone has I just love that. So talk about your nonprofit and what it's doing.
Yeah, so it's called Be Their Village. So it is to help provide resources for women and families in general that want to keep their children with unexpected pregnancies. So we do everything from providing diapers from the youngest age all the way to up if they need school supplies or even daycare. So the women can go back to getting an education or go back to work. So this all started essentially virtually, and my co-founder started asking people to donate for Christmas. So she wanted to pick a single mom and then provide presents for her kids. And man, we live in an awesome world, and there was huge support and people reaching out, and now she's doing it more on a regular basis. So even if you aren't in Colorado, you're able to help via getting the registries on Amazon and helping fill some of their wish lists.
It's so I mean, it's so great, right? Like we all have our day, and we all have our don't even want to call this a side hustle. It's too philanthropic to be a side hustle. But love that you guys are doing that, and I think again it just reflects on the people that are in our industry and everything that we do. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So give me the sales pitch. You know, that we're obviously, this is not a sales show. This is not an advertisement. I'm curious around your networking and your sales. Let's start with, give me the 1-minute sales pitch on why I should use a different perforation charge, in particular from GEODynamics, and go.
So GEODynamics, like I mentioned earlier, we really want our clients to do what's best for their wells, and better productivity as an industry is going to help just boost awareness, especially with everything going on nationwide. So however we can help, that's how we're going to step up. So GEODynamics employs one of the only ballistics engineers in industry. So when it comes to our competitors, everybody has quote unquote the best. But when we do all of our testing and analyzing, we truly do stand by our product. And that's something that's beautiful about GEODynamics is we have such a quality control. And one of our main charges is QC'd every single day in stress rock. So that's a huge thing for industry in general, is we're still testing in cement, and that's not what we're shooting in. And so when I first started with GEODynamics, I went to our engineers and I said, we have some of the most brilliant minds in the industry. Why can we not find some kind of an equation to plug in to compare cement to stress rock? And they said, we have tried. We have done thousands, over 10,000 stress rock shots. And that being said, there is no correlation. So GEODynamics really is able to test in lifelike situations. We have a pressure chamber at our corporate that goes to 50,000 PSI, 400 degrees. We have a full flow lab that we can run acid through. So we're really putting our end in order to have the best engineering facilities in order to back up and test what we're producing.
So Eric, you really don't have much to say, right? Like, I mean, that's then it's just done. Use my charge.
Well, yeah. The nice thing about it is Lindsey gets to do the big sales pitch on the company and the product, and my job is to come in and say, why are you doing what you're doing?
How receptive are people to that? I mean, Lindsey, you sort of said it. I do the best frac. I have the right. I've already looked at the data and I know that this is the best. So I don't want to use anything different. I mean, how do you cross that barrier that people maybe don't have the best frac?
You start asking a lot of questions, and if they really don't have the best frac or they don't know why, the answer usually comes out, it's because that's how we've always done it, and I hate that answer. I want someone to understand why they're doing something. It's not X barrels a minute per perforation. We're not pumping X pounds of proppant per foot of lateral. That's not a design. That's congratulations, you can use a spreadsheet.
Right.
So, my goal when I come in is when I leave, everybody in the room knows why we're doing what we're doing. And there's a reason behind it, and it's defendable, and it's optimized. So,
what worries you the most about where our industry's at and where we're going and the news? And I mean, is there anything that keeps you up at night?
I'm a little concerned about the training with the newer engineers coming in. I feel like there's some sense of, I'm not going to use entitlement's not the right word, but I think they're turned loose a little too soon. And I think that can be a little bit dangerous. I think that builds some egos, and I think that they're able to,
or they get responsibility because there's less people, and the
that's
senior people
too,
have been laid off. You sort of hand the reins over too soon, and then people kind of go off without really looking at the data. Is that a good paraphrase?
Yeah,
Okay.
we're losing a lot of experience in the industry right now, and the transfer of that knowledge isn't happening at the rate that it's leaving, and that concerns me.
Yeah. Well, how about you, Lindsey?
I think just in general, of course, our political spectrum right now is very divided. And I think that's my biggest concern. A lot of candidates are running on doing away with hydraulic fracturing in the last 5 years. And Sanders actually just got interviewed on how he would implement
9 News,
that.
right?
Yeah.
In Colorado.
Was it Kyle Clark?
Yeah, Kyle Clark on, I think he's 9 News. See, it shows that I don't watch the news.
Yeah. Well, and I saw it pop up.
that.
I'm part of Energy Strong. And so that's something where they're really good at disseminating information when it comes to what's happening in our industry. And so a lot of these candidates are running on solely doing away with fracking, it sounds like. And for me, that's my livelihood. That's not just my livelihood. That's my clients' livelihoods. And it's to the point where we do have such strong relationships in this industry. And I've had my clients come to my wedding, and we've gone through, people having babies. And it hurts my heart that people picture an older gentleman smoking a cigar in, a mahogany room. And I think that's the stereotype.
And in fact, it's younger people sitting on carpets and couches in basements. That's where the industry is going. I agree. I think that it's a great point on the loss of data and the loss of knowledge in our industry, and that there is so much data, and maybe we aren't using the important things. I think that's really good, and I totally agree on the political spectrum. And one of the reasons that I talked to you guys about before, I think that this podcast and what I'm trying to do with the hot take of the day is to put a face to the industry. And so we have Lindsey and Eric, two people who've been in the industry for a long time, and it makes a huge difference on their livelihood, on their families. And you hear the way that they approach their job and their relationships, and none of that feels like big, bad fossil fuel to me. And then when you hear about Elizabeth Warren, Senator Warren, I guess, and Senator Sanders talking about banning fracking, it just seems what is missing in that discussion is the second order consequence of, if you ban fracking, 67% of natural gas produced in the United States comes from natural gas, from fracking. And the decline rates of new wells are 40-ish%, from a base. So you will lose 30 to 40 BCF a day in a year, and natural gas will not be $2 an MCF. It will be $10 an MCF like it was in 2006. And when that happens, you marginalize poor people because they can't afford the gas for their cooking, they can't afford heat, and they have to make choices. And on the car side, 12.8 million barrels a day is produced in the United States, of which 7.7 comes from horizontal wells, of which 3.8 comes from wells drilled in the last 365 days, which again have very, very high base declines. If you ban fracking, we lose 2 million barrels a day. Oil goes up to $100 a barrel, and we have to import that oil because there is not the infrastructure in place to use it. That's the part of the conversation that I hate. I'm very supportive of wind. I'm very supportive of solar. I'm very supportive of hydro. I'm very supportive of nuclear. What I hate is the vilification of our industry, which is, the fossil fuel industry is at the expense of all these other fuels instead of as part of, because we need energy, we need rubber, we need petrochemicals, we need all of the things. So I agree with you. I think that that's a huge issue.
And, even from a logistical standpoint, even if you're removing the relationship aspect, which I think is part of the beauty of our industry, is Sanders in his interview said that the 90,000 people that are employed by oil and gas will have 5 years of salary. And if you look at it, that's, over 160 million paid days. Where's that money coming from?
Right. Yeah. I mean, the whole retrain, I mean, that's just not what happens. It's not what economics do its job. And we have destroyed our industry from the inside because of the balance sheets and the leverage the company used to get to where we are. Mm-hmm. And the quickest answer is to then lay off the highest cost people that aren't management. God forbid we lay off management. So we take all the senior people making the money, we replace them with junior people to lower G&A and kick the can down the road. But fundamentally, our industry isn't making money. Where are we getting 164 million days of pay to pay for people and to retrain it? It doesn't make sense, and our entire infrastructure in the United States is built around the fossil fuel economy. And that's why CO2 emissions are dropping, is because we've displaced coal, because economics have displaced coal, not because of anything else.
And I think that's part of the beauty of our industry is we are self-regulated. So when it comes to, we just had the big downturn, people had to learn how to operate lean and mean, and we had to come out with new technology in order to make money at lower oil costs. And so right now, we've already trimmed the fat. And so when it comes to moving forward, especially here in Colorado, we have some of the strictest regulations in the nation. Mm-hmm. And like you mentioned, we have CO2 emissions going down. I know companies that are operating up in the northern area, and they had to cut that in order to keep operating. And that's us working with the general public and creating new technology to fill those needs, and yet still keep that place as number one producers in the world right now for oil, which is amazing.
Yeah. I think that the way that we are right now, it's everybody's trying to make an emotional argument for, vilifying the industry. And I think, Sanders and they're making us the villain, but they're just playing off emotions. There's no logic to anything that they're saying. I can sympathize with a lot of people, even in Colorado. No, I don't want a rig in my backyard either. But,
right. Well, last time I checked that Aspen, which was strongly for the setback rules in Prop 112, last time I checked, they already have a couple 100 miles of setbacks off their houses in Aspen because there ain't no drilling in Aspen.
Right.
And so it's people. It's not the people who are actually being impacted in Weld County, as an example, who are making the regulations. It's a broader base, and again, people aren't having the conversation of, okay, so where is I have an electric car. Well, 27% of electricity in the United States is generated from coal. So 27% of your electricity is generated from coal. So how clean is your EV car? That's a real question.
Yeah. And the no good deed goes unpunished. Where does that battery go when it's done, right? That's got to be disposed of. Where do you get that cobalt?
Yeah.
That's mined. There's some intense labor that goes into that too, right?
Yeah.
So.
And for me, coming into the industry from the outside, My husband watches me catch spiders under a glass and carry them outside. If I thought I was ever hurting anybody, I couldn't live with myself. And there's so many reports out there now and so many studies that show that fracking does not get into your well water. Yeah. And I did my due diligence before taking that leap to self-fracking because that's what you need to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I would say if we truly want to address the issue, and the industry is facing it, and I would say we're not facing it nearly fast enough, is flaring. Methane and venting. Obviously, flaring creates CO2, but the venting of natural gas by not using VRUs, methane has 84 times the CO2 impact that CO2 does. It only has a 9-year half-life or full life, so it'll dissipate if we can reduce methane emissions. So to me, instead of the outside talking about fracking, which is effectively a full shutdown, what we need to be focused on is the flaring. And if Sanders and Warren and other politicians on the Democratic side, and quite frankly on the Republican side, would address that flaring is an issue and it needs to be more tightly regulated with quicker regulations to make fast change, I think our industry would get big benefits from that instead of fighting it and not wanting regulation and saying we deal it, because the economic incentive when gas is negative in the Permian is to burn it. So without regulations, unfortunately, you can't change it. And that's where the fish are. In the United States, we need to address flaring and emissions, not fracking.
Yeah. And, I think they're taking the easy answer of the way to get rid of flaring is to just stop fracking. Right.
That would do it.
There's no logical answer on their part as to how to do that. And I've been a part of a couple of conversations, let's just hypothetically think that we can't flare anything ever again. What do we do with that gas?
Yeah.
And there's been some fun conversations. You can, power your field with it. You might be able to, generate some steam and generate some clean water out of it. There's some fun conversations that are happening, and I think we're going to get there, but nothing happens overnight. Right?
Yeah. Well, and the amazing thing, honestly, is if you were to reduce flaring and wells had to shut in, then supply of oil and gas in the United States would fall, and then prices would go up. And then we would be actually healthier financially. Mm-hmm. So, hey, I hope that we were able to recreate your memories in the basement. I really appreciate both of you coming, Eric, not only just for security purposes, but to help give some insight into what you're seeing in the industry. Lindsey, thank you so much for having come down the stairs the first time and for doing it again today. Yeah. As always, you can follow us on the web at www.hottakeoftheday.com. The podcast is on Apple and all the places that you listen, and the best way to expand our audience and be able to get this message out to outside oil and gas is to write a review. You can email me anytime, smoke signal, call, write, whatever it takes. And until next time, be safe, be good, have a great week, and bye for now.